This is CBS.
A hand clasp that sealed the bargain. For the first time in its 30 years, the state of Israel was at peace with one of its Arab neighbors.
From Washington, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Morton Dean in our newsroom in New York.
Good evening. Let history record that at 11.5 minutes after 2 this afternoon Eastern Time, Egypt and Israel had a peace treaty, a treaty formally ending 3 decades of war.
Egypt's President Sadat and Israel's Prime Minister Begin today at the White House signed this treaty for their countries. It was a simple ceremony under a sunny sky that began with the 3 leaders walking the short distance from the White House to the North Lawn, shaking hands and getting down to the business of the day, affixing their signatures to a document sure to change the Middle East, possibly even the world. 1,500 invited guests witnessed the event, but the official witness to the treaty was President Carter, and he noted that this is just the start, that there still is a long and difficult road to travel before peace comes to all the Middle East.
We have no illusions. We must not minimize the obstacles which still lie ahead. Differences still separate the signatories to this treaty from one another, and also from some of their neighbors who feel what they have just done. Let those who would shatter peace, who would callously spill more blood, be aware that we 3 and all others who may join us will vigorously wage peace.
At no time during his speech did Mr. Carter mention by name the Palestinians, the most sensitive issue in this peace process. Throughout the brief ceremony, Arab students in Lafayette Park across from the White House shouted their opposition to the treaty. While some of the invited guests at the White House appeared distracted by the noise, neither Sadat nor Begin seemed to notice. Both men made the same point in their speeches: no more wars, no more bloodshed.
Let there be no more suffering or denial of rights. Let there be no more despair or loss of faith.
No more war, no more bloodshed, no more bereavement. Peace unto you. Shalom, salam forever.
Among the guests were virtually all the members of Congress whose approval is needed for the United States end of the peace bargain, including some $5 billion in assistance. Also, there was former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, whose peace shuttles after the '73 war began the dialogue that culminated today in the 8 documents that comprise the peace treaty.
The signing outside the White House was a picture of peace itself. But as Leslie Stahl reports, there was some last-minute trouble inside the White House.
Down-to-the-wire negotiating sessions went on in the Oval Office this morning, and in some cases, the last-minute tie-ups were over nothing more than what to call things in the treaty. For instance, there was an argument over whether to use the Egyptian name Gulf of Aqaba, the Israeli name Gulf of Eilat, or to use a map and not call it anything at all. In the end, Aqaba won. There was also the great footnote tie-up, in which Begin refused to sign the joint letter unless the West Bank was also called Judea and Samaria. That was resolved by including such a footnote, but only in the English and Hebrew versions, and one source said, and that's what clinched peace. There was also a report that Sadat admitted a particularly sensitive passage about Palestinians from his prepared speech because in negotiations he was asked to. However, White House officials deny there was any pressure on Sadat, and an Egyptian spokesman said the omission was entirely inadvertent. It has also been learned that after the ceremony, President Carter met with congressional leaders today and told them he will be asking Congress to appropriate $1.5 billion to finance America's obligations to Israel and Egypt under the treaty, and he will also ask Congress to approve nearly $5 billion in loans to be repaid over a 20 to 30-year period. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, the White House.
The treaty is contained in a slim blue Moroccan leather volume with a triple gold stripe around the edge. With what's inside, here's Marvin Cowell.
The treaty represents a swap, territory for recognition. Egypt gets the Sinai, Israel gets recognized, both countries get the opportunity for peace. Israel withdraws from the Sinai in stages, the first to last 9 months, to a line from El Arish in the north to Ras Muhammad in the south. In the process, Israel gives up the Sinai oil fields, that in 7 months, after which Israel may be allowed to buy at going world prices the same amount of oil she now takes from these wells, about 32,000 barrels a day. Israeli ships and cargo are to be granted free passage through the Suez Canal and all other nearby international waterways. The complete Israeli pullout from the Sinai is to take 3 years. Towards the end of this process, Israel will have to abandon controversial settlements near the Gaza Strip, then a few airfields, including the large and sophisticated one at Etzion, and finally the naval base at Sharm el-Sheikh at the foot of the Sinai. This stage withdrawal by Israel coincides with the granting of full diplomatic relations by Egypt. In 10 months, there is to be an exchange of ambassadors between the two countries. Then, an end to all trade barriers and boycotts, an opening of borders for travel and tourism, commercial airline service, telephone and telex facilities. What links the terms of this treaty to the broader question of peace in the Middle East is a side letter signed by both Sadat and Begin. It obliges both countries to begin within 1 month to negotiate the terms for Palestinian autonomy on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, home for more than 1 million Palestinians. The negotiation itself to last no longer than 1 year, after which there are to be elections for a so-called self-governing Palestinian Authority. Everyone assumes this will be the toughest part of the entire negotiation, with Israel ruling out any talks with a Palestine Liberation Organization, as well as any thought of an independent Palestinian state. The U.S. and Egypt have similar views on this issue, both aiming at a Palestinian homeland or entity on the West Bank and Gaza, linked perhaps to Jordan. In addition to the peace treaty itself and the Palestinian side letter, there are memoranda of agreement between the U.S. and Israel, one defining America's obligations to Israel in the event the peace treaty with Egypt collapses, and another guaranteeing American oil deliveries to Israel for 15 years if Israel cannot buy oil anywhere else. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, the State Department.
And the signs and sounds of peace were seen and heard in the land. Even as the treaty was signed at the White House, the tower in New York's Times Square flashed the word in Arabic, Hebrew, and English. And later in the day, church bells rang in the nation's capital. We'll be back in a moment with more on the historic Middle East story.
Hi, I'm Johnny Bench, and this is Johnny Bench's bench. Now I'm going to paint it with Krylon spray paint.
Krylon's easy to use, goes on smoothly. It even helps prevent rust. Watch Krylon versus the other leading national brand. The other brand runs. But Krylon's special quick-dry formula helps avoid runs and drips for a smooth, professional finish. How'd it turn out, Johnny?
No runs, no drips, no errors.
Krylon, for the do-it-yourself professional finish.
You can feel the heat before you even get close. But the only way to kill the flames is to fight them face to face until they finally die, and you lead your men to cooler air and Miller time. Time to head for the best tasting beer you can find, Miller High Life.
When it's time to relax, we got the beer, Miller beer.
The White House treaty signing was seen live via satellite in Israel and Egypt. For those stories, here are Bob McNamara in Jerusalem and Bill McLaughlin in Cairo.
Tens of thousands of Israelis saw the treaty signing ceremony on television, and the first few minutes of peace with Egypt ignited a flood of emotion. This was a day of mourning on the occupied West Bank. Arab merchants locked their shops in nearly every West Bank town to protest what they said was President Sadat's betrayal of Palestinian demands for an independent homeland. A massive Israeli security force patrolled the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Tonight, just 10 minutes before the treaty signing, a grenade exploded in Jerusalem's Old City, wounding at least 9 people. Police said the grenade was thrown from a car, apparently by Arab guerrillas. Some suspects were taken into custody. But the trouble did not shatter the mood of the Thanksgiving rallies or the celebrations. Today, Israel was determined to be at peace. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Jerusalem.
The word in Arabic is Hanshuf, we shall see. And that's the way most Egyptians still seem to feel about the coming of peace. Throughout the day in Cairo, before the treaty was signed, the mood was low-key. There was little evidence that something historic was about to happen. Egyptians went on about their business, most of that hard, menial labor, much as they have done for centuries. There were no celebrations or large public gatherings. It's believed that they may have in fact been quietly discouraged to avoid giving terrorists any easy targets. With that possibility in mind, security remained very tight throughout the country. Despite that, tonight, wherever there were Egyptians and television sets, the peace treaty signing was watched, and the mood seemed to become more optimistic. When President Sadat returns to Egypt later this week, Cairo should see some excitement as he's given the traditional hero's welcome. But it will be much more interesting to see what kind of reception Prime Minister Begin gets here when he arrives next week. His reception could set the tone for relations between the two former enemies. Bill McLaughlin, CBS News, Cairo.
As expected, Palestine Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat reacted today to the treaty signing with some pretty tough words. He predicted Sadat would be assassinated, and he vowed to chop off the hands. Those were the words he used of Mr. Carter, Sadat, and Begin. The Arab countries were active with protests and diplomatic activity. In Lebanon, Jordan, and Kuwait, there were strikes and protest marches. In Tehran, about 50 armed Arab students staged what was described as a friendly and peaceful takeover of the Egyptian embassy. The student leader said the takeover would continue indefinitely. Effigies of President Carter and Sadat and Begin were burned in Palestinian refugee camps around Beirut and in other Lebanon cities. Jordan's King Hussein flew to Damascus to coordinate with Syrian President Assad their opposition to the treaty. And in other Arab capitals, preparations were underway to impose economic sanctions and a political quarantine against Egypt. In Baghdad, Arab foreign ministers are preparing for tomorrow's start of a conference to coordinate their response to the Egyptian-Israeli peace, and Hal Walker reports that story.
The rhetoric is harsh even before the Arab League conference opens. Iraq's President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr told a visiting group that Egyptian President Anwar Sadat has sold out his country to imperialism and Zionism. The mood in the streets of Baghdad is angry, and there will be a massive demonstration against the Egypt-Israel peace treaty in the morning. The Conference of Arab Foreign and Economic Ministers was called to put into effect the sanctions against President Sadat voted by an Arab summit last November. These include a cutoff of oil and economic assistance and a military, diplomatic, and commercial boycott. The status of the ministerial conference has been upgraded in the past several hours by the arrival of Jordan's King Hussein in Baghdad and a report that Yasser Arafat, chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, will attend the meeting. The Arab nations are by no means unanimous in their approach to Sadat. And though the rhetoric of the hardliners dominates the dialogue now, there will be much debate before the final decision on how to handle Egypt. Hal Walker, CBS News, Baghdad.
Shortly before the treaty signing, a Pan American 747 made an unscheduled landing in Syria. Apparently, the Syrians thought it had violated their airspace. It took off shortly thereafter without incident. We'll be back with more on the treaty signing a little later in the broadcast.
A surprising message to Rolaids users. Tums neutralizes 1/3 more acid than Rolaids. Watch this familiar demonstration. 1 Rolaids and 1 Tums tablet are added to stomach acid. Both neutralize the acid. But on those occasions, when your stomach has even this much more excess acid, Tums can still absorb it. Rolaids can't, because tablet for tablet, Tums neutralizes 1/3 more acid than Rolaids. For acid indigestion and heartburn, take Tums.
I can't talk about it. I'm sorry, I cannot talk about it.
Sir,
I'd like to talk about
sir,
it. I'd love to talk
can you
about
tell
it.
us why you drive a Rabbit diesel?
Sure, because the government says it gets the highest mileage in America.
Hey, that is good.
Well, it's more than that. Diesel fuel also costs less than gasoline.
Oh?
Yeah, and the Rabbit diesel never needs a conventional tune-up.
Is that for the record?
Why not?
Amazing. It sounds like a miracle.
No, sounds like a Volkswagen.
Volkswagen does it again.
A magazine wants to publish an article on the making of a hydrogen bomb. The government claims it would compromise national security. Today, a federal judge sided with the government by issuing a preliminary order forbidding the magazine to publish that article. Fred Graham has the story in Milwaukee.
The issue was whether freelance writer Howard Moreland and the editors of the Progressive magazine would become the first journalists in American history to be enjoined from publishing an article solely on national security grounds. Justice Department Attorney Thomas Martin told the court that Moreland's article on the secret of the H-bomb contained details of H-bomb construction that had never appeared in public print, and that the harm to this country could be staggering. The Progressive magazine's lawyer insisted that a court order would violate the First Amendment's free press guarantee and would be futile. If Howard Moreland could do it, somebody else will duplicate that, and it will come out in the underground press. Judge Robert Warren said one cannot enjoy freedom of speech unless one enjoys freedom to live. But he said he would not sign the unprecedented injunction if the magazine would accept mediation by a panel of journalists and scientists. The magazine refused, and the judge signed.
When the founders framed the First Amendment, they did not put it out for mediation. They didn't provide procedures for compromising it. They talked about the freedom of the press. They didn't say it had to be whittled away bit by a panel of experts.
I identified myself as a reporter whenever I conducted these interviews. People told me things knowing that they were talking to a reporter who planned to publish the information, and I believe that information which I can gather in that manner cannot be very secret.
The case will now go to the Court of Appeals in Chicago, and regardless of who wins there, on to the Supreme Court, where, according to the trial judge today, a precedent damaging to a free press could be established. Fred Graham, CBS News, Milwaukee.
A National Academy of Sciences committee recently suggested that the ban against cancer-causing agents in food be modified so that benefits of a substance can be weighed against the risks. That issue was raised by the controversy over saccharin. Today, the leader of the fight against cancer warned against any relaxation of the ban. Dr. Arthur Upton, director of the National Cancer Institute, said, "The soundest principle is that thou shalt not add a carcinogen to the nation's food supply."
The valley of the jolly green giant.
I love fresh corn.
The little sprout says,
the giant grows really super corn on the cob, and now he freezes it right on the cob super fast.
Super fast freezing is why frozen Niblet Ears corn on the cob tastes like fresh picked corn. Every year stays sweet and tender. Try frozen Niblet Ears brand corn on the cob. It's delicious.
And I thought fresh corn was good.
Ho, 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 green giant.
Here, right back in there.
Gordon Hall has a headache.
Will you try extra strength Tylenol?
Okay.
Compare regular aspirin, the leading extra ingredient pain reliever, and extra strength Tylenol. Extra strength Tylenol has more medicine.
The headache is entirely gone.
What pain reliever would you choose the next time you have a headache?
I would go out and I would buy extra strength Tylenol.
Extra strength Tylenol. They're aspirin free, and you can't buy a more potent pain reliever without a prescription.
I'm ready to go.
From Geneva comes word today that the price of oil is going up. Inevitable is the way one official put it, as the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries began a conference. The first session of the 13-nation oil cartel ended without an announced agreement on prices, but the OPEC Secretary General expects one tomorrow. The Teamsters in the trucking industry have a Saturday midnight deadline for reaching a new contract. A contract that affects 300,000 truck drivers and warehouse workers across the nation. Negotiations continue today, but the Teamsters took a step that indicates they're getting ready to strike. A step into federal court in Washington to file a suit. George Herman reports.
The union's lawsuit states in several places that a Teamsters strike is a likelihood, that the negotiations are not proceeding satisfactorily, and that part of the blame rests on federal officials, including President Carter. It takes note of the president's threat to order an immediate Taft-Hartley back-to-work injunction. And in an unprecedented action, the union asks the court to order various federal officials to produce documents, studies, and reports already prepared. These are the documents which the government would use in court to bolster its argument that a Teamsters union strike would be a threat to the national health and well-being. The Teamsters union, assuming such arguments are going to be made, asks that the documents be produced now so it will have time to prepare its case that a Teamsters strike is not a threat to the national well-being. The negotiations themselves are continuing and reportedly are making progress. So today's action is both a pressure tactic and a preparation for the worst. George Herman, CBS News at the Teamsters Union headquarters in Washington.
Stanley Rifkin, who committed a $10 million bank robbery by computer, drew an 8-year prison sentence today in federal court in Los Angeles. The 32-year-old Rifkin had pleaded guilty of using his knowledge as a computer consultant and a 10-cent telephone call to transfer the money out of the Security Pacific National Bank. The stock market today was down in light trading.
Introducing Mega Vitamins from Geritol, so you know it's potent.
We're just starting out, and we know it's going to take a lot of doing.
But we're going to work hard.
And take good care of ourselves.
And since I started taking new Mega Vitamins, I'm getting all the potency I want from a vitamin. With Mega Vitamins, you're sure of getting really potent amounts of those vitamins your body uses up every day, plus all the iron of regular Geritol. Mega Vitamins from Geritol.
So you know it's potent.
How elegant.
What wine is that? It's going to be an evening to remember.
This is a lovely wine.
A Chablis.
I don't know how she does it.
She's a great hostess.
Look how everything glitters.
My favorite, Chablis Blanc.
When you invite your favorite people, invite their favorite wine. Cool, crisp Gallo Chablis Blanc.
The peace treaty signed today is for the living, but it also commemorates the thousands who died in 4 Egyptian-Israeli conflicts. Bob Simon on the Israeli side and Doug Sefton on the Egyptian side visited some families for which this day brings special remembrance.
October 6, 1973, Egyptian commandos crossed the Suez Canal and pierced the Israeli Bar-Lev line. Through attack and counterattack, the war lasts 16 days. And when it was over, more than 20,000 men were dead. These were 2. Ahmed Hashim, 38, killed as he attempted to drop a hand grenade down the turret of an Israeli tank. His brother, Mustafa, 34, commando major, as he covered withdrawal of his men, killed by a bomb dropped by an Israeli Phantom jet. Hashim, their widowed mother, was bombed out of her home in Suez during the war and now lives in this apartment at Barrages, a village 12 miles down the Nile from Cairo. She is 75 and sits long hours here, too ill to walk the stairs to life in the street. She remembers the pride she felt because her sons were fighting for Egypt and the sorrow when told that one was dead and then a second one. She is deeply religious. Too weak to stand or kneel, she sits, and in her prayers she says she tells God, "Thank you." The man who falls in a jihad or holy war is guaranteed a place in heaven. Having given 2 sons, she is doubly blessed. The bitterness she felt once for the Israeli enemy has since burnt out. If Sadat can forgive, then so can she. Not often enough for a mother, but sometimes her youngest son, Ibrahim, comes from Suez to visit with his wife and children. As the only surviving son, Ibrahim didn't have to serve in the army. Peace for him is the hope for prosperity, but he remains somewhat skeptical of Israeli intentions. But his mother wants to believe. She can't allow herself to regret the sacrifice of her own children, but she hopes that generation was the last to have to fight. She said her sons fought for peace, and by Allah, she wishes they were here to see it.
Every tomb of every fallen Israeli soldier was decorated with flowers today in honor of the ceremony in Washington. The Ben-Hurines don't need this pretext. They visited the graves of their sons several times a week, every week, for the past 12 years. The Ben-Hurines came to Israel from Brooklyn in 1939. They were founding members of Kibbutz Kfar Menachem, which at the time was a dangerous outpost between Jerusalem and the sea. Their 4 children were all born here. Amram, the eldest, managed the cotton farm. Yohanan, his younger brother, was a musician. Both were called up in the tense weeks preceding the 1967 war. Both fell on the same day.
Over 2,000 people came to the funeral. People that we never saw in our lives. When they heard, they asked her the question, were you afraid that your boys are liable to be hurt, to be killed? And her answer was, I have a tape of the thing. It never dawned on me that anything would happen. What I was afraid of, that my boys that I gave birth to, they are liable to kill somebody else. That's what she was afraid of.
The Ben-Hurines have always been against war, they say. But if peace is coming, for their family, it's coming a bit too late.
I think that many people in the country feel that it's time we had no more war.
We're 30 years too late. We think about them, and we think of what might have been had it not happened. And that's the most terrible thing, because both of them had been so promising as far as what they could have done for themselves, for us, for the people, for the country, for the world, and they can't do it.
Tonight, the mothers of Egyptian and Israeli soldiers and of sons unborn can breathe just a mite easier. But the peace for which they yearn cannot be assured by the mere scribble of a pen. After all, just 50 years ago, at that same walnut table at which the principals sat today, earlier representatives of the great powers signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact. It renounced war forevermore. Peace won't come overnight. It won't come easily. It may prove so difficult it won't come at all. But today is a day for dreaming the ultimate dream. And that's the way it is. Monday, March 26, 1979. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News at the White House in Washington. Good night.
From Washington, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Morton Dean in our newsroom in New York. This is CBS. From Jerusalem, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Roger Mudd in our newsroom in New York.
Cronkite had struck at what is most dear to me in my life.
Viewers get the chance to speak their minds, and CBS News is listening. It's your turn.
Wednesday on CBS.